Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another live stream. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. As you can see, I am joined by Ali Abunimah, the executive director at the Electronic Intifada. You will want to go to the video description after the show and make sure you follow, share, support in any way that you can the Electronic Intifada for all things Palestine, Gaza, and all of the connections to this just monumental and historic moment and struggle in that land for that people and for that region. Ali, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you again, Danny, for having me, and thank you for all the brilliant work you're doing to educate people.
I really appreciate that. Now, let's just get started. Everyone, as you are coming in, be sure to hit the like button. That helps boost the stream and the algorithm. As we all are aware, YouTube does not generally like this subject too much. So be sure to boost the stream. If you are here and you are watching, just hit that like button. And then, of course, you can find Electronic Intifada as well as all the places to support this channel in the video description below. But Ali, let us get started. So the last time you were on this channel, last time you were here with me, it was the day after Al-Aqsa flood began. And a lot has happened since then. Of course, there has been the just onslaught, the genocide that Israel has been committing ongoing. Now with the Lancet report saying that there may be, that medical journal saying there may be and likely upwards of 186,000 Palestinians killed thus far. In day, I think it is 285. We're getting close to the year point. Now, I wanted to ask you, though, about not just this side of it, because we know there was just a massacre in Khan Yunis, but I wanted to ask you about the resistance side, because Israel is reporting in Israeli media that they're having some troubles, that they are running, believe it or not, running out of tanks, running out of ammunition, despite all of the U.S. aid that has been flooding into Israel, in large part because of the fierce fighting of the Palestinian resistance. So could you please help the audience understand just what this looks like? Because I think oftentimes we view Palestinians and the people there as kind of helpless, and there's been a fierce resistance that has really just embroiled Israel into what seems like an unwinnable war. So, Ali, to you.
Thanks, Danny. I think the first thing I want to emphasize for everyone is that attention may be drifting away from Gaza, but the genocide is only intensifying. Yesterday, Monday, the spokesperson for UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, said that the past week has been one of the deadliest weeks in Gaza since the genocide began. And when you look at the reports, it's just massacre after massacre up and down Gaza, and attacks that are so brazen that at the beginning of this genocide, Israel would have made excuses and there would have been sort of a feigned international outrage. Now they pass without any notice, just attacks on UN schools, which are of course now not functioning as schools, but functioning as shelters for thousands, each one housing thousands and thousands of displaced people. Israel has now flattened the headquarters of UNRWA, the UN agency, in Gaza City. Pretty much every hospital has been destroyed. And this is intensifying. The death toll is going up. And the lethality of Israel's attacks is going up, not down. And you mentioned the Lancet report, which is an estimate. The official death toll is around now is over 38,000, but everybody believes that that's a gross undercount because the institutions in Gaza that carry out these, that keep these statistics are so degraded. They're doing their best and they're still functioning. But thousands, countless thousands of people are under the rubble. Most of Gaza is in ruins, and they can't be counted. And not counted in the official statistics is all the deaths that are not from direct violence like bombs and guns and and the other weapons Israel uses, but hunger and starvation, which has been deliberately imposed and continues to be deliberately imposed. People who may have heart attacks or strokes or other things that happen in everyday life, and they go to the hospital and their life can be saved, but there are no hospitals to go to, so they just die. The father of one of my dear friends and one of our colleagues in Gaza died that way. He couldn't, he had an illness and couldn't get to the hospital, so he died. There are 10,000 cancer patients in Gaza who have no access to chemotherapy or other treatment. You think about older people who have chronic illnesses like diabetes or high blood pressure, which can normally be managed with taking a pill every day, and they don't have access to medicine, they don't have access to hospitals, so they're dying early deaths. And so the Lancet estimate is based on that understanding, and it's a very reasonable estimate. And I think it's important to say this up front, because this is the thing that keeps me up at night, Danny. Attention drifting away, people turning to the bullshit US election, people turning to sports and celebrities and so on. And the fact that it's summer and the schools are out, the universities are out, and credit to the students, they were the conscience of the nation, of the world. They were the ones who were forcing the United States to confront its direct complicity in this genocide, which is why the government, governors, Joe Biden, and of course university presidents cracked down so brutally on them, because they were turning public opinion against this genocide. I just wanted to put all that front and center. But your question about the resistance, this week, the Israeli army was forced to admit in a court filing in the High Court in Israel that it is short of tanks and it is very short on ammunition. And if you follow the resistance closely and you watch the videos that the resistance factions, Hamas, it's Qassam brigades, the military wing of Hamas, Sarai al-Quds, the military wing of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the other factions, every day they're putting out videos showing them blasting these tanks to smithereens, sniping and killing Israeli soldiers. And Israel is not publicly revealing the extent of its severe military losses. And that's why the Israeli generals, we have this unprecedented public schism in Israel between the government and the military is saying, look, we need an end to the war, not because we want to be kind to the Palestinians. All these generals are just as genocidal as Benjamin Netanyahu, but because we're short of soldiers. They don't have enough soldiers. They're having to force reservists into lengthy rotations and multiple back-to-back rotations. This is primarily a civilian army. I mean, a reservist army. There is a core of the Israeli military that is professional, but the vast majority of the troops are people coming from civilian life. So that means that they're not well trained to begin with, which is why we see snipers picking them off so easily, because they're not following basic protocols. And their motivation and morale is very low and collapsing. So in that context, the only thing Israel has is to bomb schools and hospitals and murder civilians, because that's their substitute for victory. If for those who know a bit of history and understand the name of your the reference to Dhaiphong in the name of in your name, your program name, know the history of Vietnam, the Vietnam liberation struggle, which is that the United States was able to kill millions of people in Southeast Asia, not just in Vietnam, not just in, but also in Cambodia and Laos. Cambodia was the most bombed country in history. Perhaps Gaza has exceeded it now. I don't know. At least in terms of per square mile or per capita, Gaza is now probably the most bombed place in the history of Earth. But that did not translate into a victory for the United States. It was still a massive defeat for the United States. And so it is with Israel. They're able to murder people, but they have lost this war. And everybody in Israel knows it. The generals know it. The politicians know it. The US government, without which Israel could not be conducting this genocide, knows it. But they don't want to stop the genocide because to do so is an admission of defeat.
Yes, yeah, and appreciate you referencing Vietnam in my name, because that's essentially why I took the name, because of how it's one of the most bombed cities in Vietnam, and maybe the most bombed city in the world now. Gaza could very well be up there. We will definitely have that number once this stops, when it stops. And you mentioned the electoral silly season that we are in, Ali, and Israel's situation is very dire, as you stated, in terms of what's going on in its so-called war. And we see that. I mean, Yoav Gallant, he was one of the first to come out, and human animals all over social media when Al-Aqsa flood
The
launched,
hubris.
and the
Yeah.
response, yeah, that's what that now he is the one who is kind of, is at odds with Netanyahu, supposedly. And in large part, I believe that's because their so-called objectives are just unreachable. And now you
And
have
the
someone
army
like
has
Jade.
said that. The army has
Yeah.
actually said that. Daniel Hagari, that clown of a spokesperson who we all remember from the early months when they attacked and destroyed Ar-Rantisi Children's Hospital, and he's the guy who was pointing at the wall calendar and saying, this is a list of terrorists, and it was just like a wall calendar with the days of the week on it. But he came out in an interview 2 weeks ago in the Israeli media and said, look, the objective of destroying and defeating Hamas is impossible. And he didn't do that as sort of an individual. He did that as the spokesperson for the army.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was interesting, the report that you mentioned with regard to the tanks and ammunition, that stems from a program that Israel, or the so-called Israeli occupation forces, were trying to launch to integrate women into the ranks of their tank units, and they just don't have them. So they don't have the ability to start training women with these tanks, or so-called Israeli occupation forces, they love to pink wash, they love to diversify their so-called military ranks, but they don't have the tanks. So, Ali, maybe just briefly to close on this point, where does victory lie for the Palestinian people? Because it is, of course, an incredibly just difficult. It is maybe in history one of the most brutal moments for a people to experience this genocide. But where does victory lie, in your opinion, given that Israel is on the retreat? Rafah was supposed to be the end of it, but there is no end because the Palestinians keep fighting back. So where would victory lie here?
I mean, I want to be very careful not to be glib or to romanticize Palestinians in Gaza who are going through experiences that just beyond anything humans are meant to endure. And I'm in touch with friends and colleagues in Gaza every day, and they say it's unbearable. I mean, they describe horrors that no horror movie can do justice to, and suffering and deprivation and mental anguish and fear that is beyond anything I can begin to comprehend. And yet they say we have no choice but to hold on. We'll never give up. We'll never surrender. Nobody wants to surrender because they say, it's, to paraphrase, give me liberty or give me death. That's not something anyone can impose on someone else. That's only a choice a people that have decided on liberation can make. And that's why the resistance has support. It has, and I can't claim it's universal support in Gaza or anywhere else in Palestine. There's always, some people who have a different view. But without that base of support, it couldn't endure this long. And what I'm saying is that despite this Holocaust, there is a sense among Palestinians that I speak to, and that I'm in touch with, that Israel is defeated, that it is a dead entity walking, let's say, because there's no future for an entity like this. And I think, again, history helps us to cope with the enormity of what we're seeing now, because when we understand the price that other peoples, other nations have paid for their liberation, we talked about Vietnam, but across Africa, Algeria, South Africa, Mozambique, Angola, across Africa, around the world, that the colonial powers, the Philippines, the United States, the atrocities it committed in the Philippines, are very unknown to most Americans. And my point is that the colonial powers, the Europeans and the Americans primarily, have never been less brutal than Israel. They were as brutal, if not worse, in many instances in history. And yet those people won their liberation at a very, very high price. And what I am willing to bet is Israel will not be the first one to buck the trend. It's going the same way. It is going the same way. And there is no future for this entity. And when you look at we've had on the Electronic Intifada live stream recently, we had Ilan Pappé, the Israeli historian. We had Shir Hever, who is incredibly informed. And their observations about the internal collapse of Israeli society are so important. Social, economic collapse in morale, ideological collapse. The economic price, we talked about the reservists. The Israeli military doctrine was never designed to sustain long wars. The idea was always short wars of a week, maybe 3 weeks, on the other person's territory, the enemy's territory. What do you have now? You have an endless war that's already almost 10 months long with no end in sight, because Israel doesn't want it to end. And so the drain on the economy with all those reservists gone, of course, there's no tourism. There's no inward investment. Intel just pulled a $25 billion plan to build a factory in Israel. The recent statistics that revealed that 46,000 businesses have failed in Israel since October 7th, and and that number is expected to reach 60,000 by the end of this year. So without the lifeline, without the direct support of the United States, Israel would already have collapsed. So this project has no future. And what Israelis don't talk about is the massive brain drain. Everyone who can is getting out. And so, the smartest, the people with the means, the people with the second passports this was already happening before October 7th. It's certainly accelerating now, although Israel is very quiet about the numbers. So that's the big picture, that I've never been more certain that Palestine will be liberated. But the price of it, Palestinians are not going to get away with any less price than other peoples have had to pay, sadly. And colonial powers don't learn and they don't change.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely. Everything you said is just so true. And on the tragic sense, it's this balance between tragedy and just and hope. And I wanted to maybe move on to the larger. You brought up. I mean, what you gave was a very large picture. But there's also one of the things that I've been trying to follow as closely as possible is the response from the axis of resistance, which I know you have been covering at the Electronic Intifada. And it does hearken when you were mentioning the anti-colonial liberation movements. There is a lot of parallels that I draw, which has been one of the sources, I think, of optimism in this moment of incredible cruelty. And I wanted to ask you, as we watch, I wanted to pull up everyone's new favorite vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance. We have him chosen as VP. There's a lot of hope that he'll be anti-interventionist on Ukraine. At the same time, he has been very close with
He'll fall in
AIPAC.
line. That's my prediction. He'll
All
fall
right.
in line.
And he's well endowed by AIPAC. And we're just going to listen to his rhetoric about Iran because he makes a certain comment that points to the axis of resistance. And then I want you to comment on what the picture is, because it is a very large one. So here is what JD Vance had to say upon being nominated vice president by Donald Trump.
A lot of people recognize that we need to do something with Iran, but not these weak little bombing runs. If you're going to punch the Iranians, you punch them hard, and that's what he did when he took out Soleimani. By the way, that action, people said that it would lead to broader war. It actually brought peace. It actually checked the Iranians and slowed them down a little bit. But let me just say something about this Iran issue, because maybe the most important diplomatic breakthrough of the Trump administration was the Abraham Accords. If you want to check Iran, the way to do it is to, one, withdraw their oil money, which of course Joe Biden's been bad about, but you've also got to enable the Israelis and the Sunni Arab states to work together. And
so I wanted to just play that briefly because he mentioned punching Iran, but he talked about these little bombings, and what he's referencing, I believe, is there are bombings on, let's say, Ansar Allah of Yemen in their Red Sea blockade. There's, of course, the Iraqi and Syrian resistance, which have been met by CENTCOM bombings here and there over the last several years. But of course, a lot of talk about Iran. And of course, we know Hezbollah is also being threatened. I don't know how many months it's been by Israel, just constantly saying they're going to go to war. They're going to go to war, and the U.S. saying they will defend them. So could you talk about, J.D. Vance is kind of laying out this picture. Iran is the big problem, but what he's really talking about, I feel like, is the axis of resistance that is, I think, the linchpin of what Israel and those U.S. politicians that back Israel so hard want to eliminate.
Well, what struck me in listening to him, and I hadn't heard that before, and I honestly haven't been paying that much attention to the circus of American politics. But what struck me is that he was talking in the standard imperial Washington lingo, in which the United States gets to decide everything and gets to tell everyone what to do. But that's just not the case. What J.D. Vance and what perhaps others in Washington don't understand is that Iran is a sovereign country. Iran decides its fate, and that's why they hate Iran. That's why they're determined to find some way to destroy Iran. But again, you have to look at the sweep of history. Iran had a revolution in 1979 against an American backed puppet regime that acted as, the US local native policemen in the region, brutal to the Shah was absolutely brutal to Iranians. And what the Iranian Revolution did, and it was a revolution in the true sense, that it completely changed the system. It removed the old elites, it removed their old relationships, and it replaced them with a sovereign regime in Iran. Now, you can like that regime, you can love that regime, you can hate that regime because of its social policies or its theology or whatever. People have that right, and Iranians disagree about that. But what there can be no argument about is that Iran is a sovereign country, and what it has been working to do is to build up its strength and its sovereignty in order to be able to defend that sovereignty, which was gained not just through the revolution against the American-backed Shah, but also the American-backed Iraqi invasion of Iran in shortly after the revolution, and the war which was fueled against Iran. Iraq attacked Iran in 1979 or 1980, and the war continued for 8 years. But it continued because the United States, Western Europe, Germany, France, Britain were supplying Iraq with weapons. The Gulf Arab states were funding the Iraqi war machine, and the goal was to destroy the Iranian Revolution at birth. But Iran withstood that American-backed invasion, and again paid a very high price. I haven't had the opportunity to go to Iran, but my Iranian friends tell me that, you know, in every Iranian town you see a memorial to all those people who died in the Iran-Iraq war, which again was an imperial proxy war. It's important to understand that. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because a country that has won its sovereignty and independence this way will not give it up easily. That's why Iran has defied all the constant predictions that, oh, the people are going to turn against the regime. What my understanding is that people may oppose the government on all sorts of things, but nobody wants Iran to be destroyed. Nobody wants Iran to be invaded. And so Iranians rally around. Now you spread that picture out across the region, and you see that Iran is in alliance with other like-minded movements and countries. So Hezbollah in Lebanon, the resistance movement, which was founded to resist the Israeli invasion in 1982. In Syria, of course, which is the literal land bridge between the resistance in Lebanon and Iran. And that's another reason why Syria was targeted by this proxy war for a decade that was intended to topple its regime and replace it with a pro-American regime or a failed state like we see in Libya and in other countries invaded and destroyed by the United States. And then Ansarullah in Yemen, similarly, you know, the United States, Britain, France, and the Saudis waged a war for 9 years to try to destroy the Ansarullah in Yemen, and they have only gained strength to the point where they're now independently intervening to enforce a naval blockade, a maritime blockade on Israel in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. And the US has thrown everything it can at this axis of resistance, and it's only gotten stronger. So I think the way to understand this axis of resistance is not in the terms that a J.D. Vance would use it. Oh, Iran, you know, they're troublemakers in the region, and a Sunni Shia, you know, split and all this bullshit. These are people who, like other people in the world, have decided, you know, we are going to determine the fate of our own country, not you. You don't get to tell us what to do. You don't get to steal our resources. You don't get to choose our leaders. We do. And if you like our leaders or hate them, it's not we don't care. It's not your problem. And this is the fundamental demand of people all over the region. It's the promise of the UN Charter that every nation is sovereign and independent and free from interference in its internal affairs from other countries. And so this axis of resistance is rolling back American imperialism in the region. It's rolling back European imperialism and neocolonialism in the region. And it just doesn't matter if Americans love the government of Iran or hate the government of Iran. That is purely the business of Iranians. And the same is true in the other countries. But what this has done, to bring it back to Gaza, is it has provided a strategic depth and width for the resistance in Palestine that is crucial. Gaza is completely blockaded and isolated. It's a tiny area. Why hasn't Israel been able to defeat and impose its will on the resistance in this really tiny area that has no natural resources. I've been to Gaza. It really has no natural resources. There's no oil, there's no diamonds, there's no gold. I don't know what else you might call a natural resource. There are no forests. It's there are no mountains, there's no high ground, there's nowhere to hide. Though, of course, that's why the resistance went underground. But it's been able to fight, yes, because of the bravery and courage and heroism of the resistance and the skill of their planning and their long-term thinking. All of that is absolutely to their credit. But it's also because of the wider relationships and alliances with Iran, with Hezbollah in Lebanon. And Hezbollah is waging a very sophisticated war against Israel in the north, entirely in support of Gaza. Hezbollah says, our battle with Israel right now is in support of Gaza. If there's a ceasefire that the resistance in Gaza accepts, we stop immediately. No point coming to talk to us about finding a separate solution for the fighting on the Lebanese front. We'll stop the minute Israel stops its genocide in Gaza. And Ansar Allah in Yemen have done the same. And Israel can't do a damn thing about it. They are unable to prevent Hezbollah from destroying, and that's what Hezbollah has done. And we've covered this extensively on the Electronic Intifada live stream. Our colleague John Elmer gives a brilliant military analysis of this almost every week. Systematic destruction of Israel's military and surveillance infrastructure on the border with Lebanon. And Israel makes a lot of threats about, oh, we're going to deal a death blow to Lebanon and to Hezbollah, and we're going to turn it to Gaza. And, you know, never bet against Israel doing that, because, as we know, they're truly genocidal. But they haven't done it yet, when I think in previous years they would have by this point, because they're so weakened. They're so weakened. They don't have the ground forces to mount any kind of serious invasion of Lebanon. In 2006, Israel invaded Lebanon and was soundly defeated and humiliated. That was 2 decades ago. Hezbollah is far stronger now. And of course, the Israeli army, as we said, is already decimated by the resistance in Gaza. And at the same time, Israel's trump card has always been its air force and its air superiority and its ability to carpet bomb from the sky with virtually no opposition. And now they can't do that with Lebanon without the risk of massive mutually assured destruction. Yes, Israel can destroy Lebanon, but the Israelis now believe, and with good basis, that Lebanon can now destroy Israel.
Yeah, I remember reading a report a year ago, before the Al-Aqsa flood, and the report was that there were worries from the Israeli military establishment that if there was a broader war with Lebanon, that 1,000 missiles would rain on Tel Aviv in about a 2-hour span. I mean, that's a very large number of missiles. That is something the Iron Dome likely wouldn't be able to defend.
Arsenal is far more sophisticated than that of Hamas or any other Palestinian group.
Exactly. So these missiles, they would hurt, is the point. And I wanted to, on this point of the resistance, also, if you could talk about you mentioned the economic strife that Israel is suffering. Talk about the role of Yemen right now, because, there are reports about the Eilat port being bankrupt now. And the U.S. is engaging in strikes, it seems like every other day, trying to, supposedly, as J.D. Vance said, right, these little strikes, trying to stop Ansar Allah, but yet the blockade continues. So any comment on that?
Yeah, and of course, remember, as I said, that Barack Obama began a genocidal war on Yemen in 2015, and with the Saudis and the British and the French, and they were at certain points bombing Yemen far more intensely, killing a lot of civilians, destroying a lot in Yemen, but achieving absolutely nothing in terms of diminishing the determination of Yemen to resist this and the development of their abilities. It's the same story with Hamas, with Hezbollah, the more Israel and its allies, for want of a better word, have attacked the resistance, assassinated its leaders, murdered civilians to try to demoralize the society or split the or undermine the public support for the resistance, the stronger they've gotten. And that's the story in Yemen. And in terms of the economic or the naval blockade on Israel, it's very significant. If you look, as I do, I'm not an expert on international shipping, but I watch channels that cover international shipping, and I read articles about this. And something like 80% of large container traffic is now being routed around the Cape of Good Hope. So having to go the long way around Africa to get from Asia to Europe, from China to and other Asian ports to Europe, and vice versa. And this increases costs dramatically because, of course, it takes longer, it's more expensive in fuel for the ships, insurance costs go up. There are huge logistical issues in terms of just the positioning of containers and ships and so on. It's all very complicated. But in terms of Israel itself, and by the way, these effects are only now starting to be felt because it takes a while for all of this to filter through the system. In terms of Israel, several ships have been sunk, which they weren't necessarily Israeli ships, but Ansarullah identified what they said was some connection with Israel, and some have been sunk. That we've seen footage of, I think, at least 2, but possibly 3 large ships going down in the ocean. And the insurers look at that, the shippers look at that, and they say, that's not for us. And so, as you said, Eilat, which is the main Red Sea port, an important port, as I understand, I think it's the main port for importing automobiles into Israel, is effectively shut down. But it's what it also means is that the economic impact on Israel is also in terms of unavailability of certain basic goods and more inflation as well. Costs go up there. And then don't forget you have Turkey, which has prohibited the export of a wide range of goods, what they call dual-use goods, to Israel. But this includes construction supplies and cement and concrete and steel and other things that are crucial to Israel's construction industry, which is a major part of the economy, real estate and building luxury condos and then trying to sell them to rich American Zionists. So that's come to a halt. Most of the labor, we don't often talk about the labor side. This is underestimated. But Israel, as much as it I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but a few years ago, there was a lot of debate about how much Israel resembles South Africa. And one of the arguments that was always made is that, there's a difference between the apartheid regime in South Africa because the apartheid regime needed black workers. And that gave black workers, a lot of strength. We saw trade unions in the mining industry and so on in South Africa played a major role in the anti-apartheid struggle. But people would argue that Israel doesn't need the Palestinians the same way. And maybe that's true to some extent, but it's less true than people think. Israel's entire construction sector and a large part of its agricultural sector depends on Palestinian labor, and particularly Palestinians coming in from the occupied West Bank. But since October 7th, Israel has virtually banned those workers coming in. And the result is that the construction industry, a major part of the economy, is pretty much shut down. So there are all these impacts that, taken together, erode Israel's long-term prospects and viability and make it, I think, an increasingly precarious and a doomed colonial project. I don't want to sound, overconfident about that, but that's the trajectory we see. And this has been visible for decades, and Israel hasn't really been able to do anything to change that trajectory. It's been on the same trajectory, and it's still on it.
Mm. Yeah, and in many ways, I mean, I think just everything that you just outlined there summarized just it's all intensified. A lot of what we've been talking about. I mean, Ansar Allah maybe jumped into this um, in solidarity with the Palestinian people at this moment, but the entire axis of resistance has been at this for quite a long time, and Israel has been on this trajectory, as you said, for quite a long time. But it's this moment of Al-Aqsa flood, of the genocide. It's so much more pronounced, and things just feel like they're accelerating so much faster than October 6th, 2023, and before that. Like it's
And
just so
this
much
is world
acceleration.
history. I mean, this is the what we're seeing is the slow motion expulsion of the United States from a region that it has dominated and controlled since 1945, since it came in and effectively took the place of uh, the European colonial powers, primarily Britain and France. In 1945, the United States became the imperial power in the region, and it is being expelled from the region. Uh, and it's a slow motion expulsion. I'm sure J.D. Vance doesn't like it, and Joe Biden doesn't like it, and Donald Trump doesn't like it, even though they sometimes profess these sort of slightly maverick views, but they all believe in U.S. hegemony and imperial power, and they want to preserve it. And they don't have, this whole business about Iran is a troublemaker, and this. I mean, it was hilarious to see J.D. Vance bring up the Abraham Accords, which was a Trump administration policy. This idea of normalizing relations between Arab tyrannies backed by the United States and Israel, and bringing them into an alliance against Iran. That was the Trump policy. That was the Obama policy, and that's the Biden policy. Biden fully embraced the Abraham Accords. Biden embraced all of Trump's actions in the Middle East, the moving of the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, recognition of Israel's illegal occupation of the Golan Heights, and so on. He didn't reverse any of that. He's continued it. And remember, Jake Sullivan, who is Joe Biden's national security advisor, said, like, I think it was just weeks before October 7th, that the Middle East has never been calmer. Everything is stable. Everything's great. They thought they were going to get this Saudi-Israeli normalization deal, which was, the cherry on the cake of the Abraham Accords. And then October 7th happened. And their hubris, their ignorance, their lack of knowledge, their arrogance, all of it together means that they may or may not understand that the United States is being pushed out of the region. And I don't see that reversing, because the United States has brought nothing but death and destruction to the people of the region. It extracts the resources. It's there to get the oil, get resources. I don't mean that in a simplistic way, but that's what it's about. It's about controlling world markets and the movement of energy and capital and so on, while the masses of the people in the region are impoverished under these American-backed dictatorships. And why would anyone choose that? Why would anyone choose that? When you think about a rising power like China, and what does China bring? It brings infrastructure. It brings development. Even in a U.S. client like Jordan, a U.S. vassal state like Jordan, I go to Jordan all the time, and I noticed when I was leaving Jordan the last time, the new airport, which opened a few years ago. It's this very modern airport, and it was run by I think they gave the franchise to run it to a French conglomerate. But when you walk onto the aircraft, the gates, the jetways that lead to the aircraft are Chinese. That basic infrastructure is Chinese. You have roads, highways, hospitals being built around the world by China. even again, a country like Jordan, the US vassal state, you see like Chinese cars everywhere. Like this is just in the past 2, 3, 4 years. And you just multiply that across the world. What do the Americans bring to the region? I don't see any American hospitals, even in a client state like Jordan. Even, a country where the regime has given everything to the United States, all its loyalty. People aren't benefiting from that. Nobody's benefiting from that. Take Iraq, which was invaded and destroyed by the United States in the US-led aggression 20 years ago. China is rebuilding Iraq. China is rebuilding the infrastructure. Of course, Iraqis are doing the work, but I'm talking about in terms of the infrastructure know-how and the contractors and so on. China is building thousands of schools in Iraq. And across Africa, of course, you have this propaganda in the West about how China is, this racist yellow peril propaganda about how it's all a secret scheme and China has its desire. They are projecting onto China what the United States is actually doing whenever it claims it's coming to a country to help. The United States won't give you a penny or put a brick on top of another brick unless it's benefiting them. And they say it openly, because when they talk about in Congress funding, sending another 60 billion for the proxy war against Russia in Ukraine, they say, oh, well, this is good for America because most of it goes to US weapons companies. So they make no secret about that. So I'm saying this just to put in perspective why nobody loves the United States outside the United States. It's not loved except in a few islands, like in Western Europe, a very irrelevant and increasingly extremist and disturbing part of the world. And, where else? Where else are they loved?
Well, I'm glad you brought up China because I had a question about
I'm
both
sorry,
China.
I dropped my pen. So
That's okay. All good here. Well, I'm glad you brought up China because I wanted to ask you about China and, of course, Russia as this multipolar world is emerging. Their role navigating what is going on, of course, in Gaza and the larger processes that we've discussed around U.S. and Israeli aggression. Because both Russia and China have met, and I believe China is going to meet with the Palestinian leadership resistance groups. I know Hamas and Fatah, the PLO, will be meeting in Beijing in July of 2024. It happened in April of 2024 in China too. And then I know earlier in the year, there were meetings in Moscow. So I wanted to ask you about your take on how China and Russia, given their just growing leadership status in the world, their influence, and also given how complicated and how difficult navigating around and within a still U.S. dominated world order, with Israel being one of the most protected, if not the most protected state under this order. What has been your analysis of this?
I think it's mixed. I mean, where I would be critical, I would say that Russia and China have taken some good positions and some positions I don't entirely love. China is one of the very few countries that has openly and clearly articulated that Palestinians have a right to armed resistance. There may be other countries that say that tacitly or have that view tacitly, but very few of them will say it openly. China has said it openly, and I think that's important. China has also taken, China is very good when you read Chinese political statements and documents. There's always sort of a deep analysis in them of the root causes of any issue. And I think China has a very good anti-colonial understanding of the root causes of the situation in Palestine. Having said that, China is always diplomatically cautious, and that's often a very good thing, or at least it's very deliberative. But I think China remains very much within really a completely moribund consensus about the so-called two-state solution that is just a complete dead end, and they haven't really broken from that or moved beyond it publicly. They may be studying it more carefully behind closed doors. I don't know. In terms of bringing together Hamas and Fatah, this may be well intended. I think it's futile because the Palestinian Authority, which, Fatah controls the Palestinian Authority, is a collaborator regime. It's a traitor regime. And so the idea of reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah is ridiculous on its face, because you can't have reconciliation, unity between collaborators with the enemy and those who are resisting the enemy. Either one side has to give up resistance, or the other side has to give up collaboration and treachery. And Hamas will not give up resistance. There have been efforts, or people even thought at certain points that they'd given up and they were moving in that direction. Clearly, they hadn't. That's what we saw with the Al-Aqsa flood. And there's no sign that Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority leader, and his coterie are planning to give up collaboration and treason anytime. So I'm not really sure what the purpose of those talks are. Maybe there's more to it that I don't know, but that equation hasn't changed since 2007, when the U.S. and Mahmoud Abbas tried to overthrow the newly elected Hamas Palestinian Authority, and you got this split between Gaza and the West Bank. That's another story we can keep for another day. But that equation hasn't changed. I don't see it changing. It's similar with Russia in terms of how its public positions. It's taken some very good positions. Russia pushed back against the U.S. in the Security Council. But I think that, if South Africa can take Israel to the International Court of Justice over the genocide in Gaza, if tiny Nicaragua can take Germany to the International Court of Justice over its role in Israel's genocide, then I think Russia and China could be playing a lot more active roles, and I would like to see that. And that's, I think, befitting their growing status in the world to do so. That said, I think that it's important to point out that even if they do nothing, the geopolitical shifts where their power are growing is very significant, because there is, even if China doesn't actively send weapons to the Palestinian resistance, or even if Russia doesn't actively send weapons, the fact is that Russian and Chinese technology, and increasingly, by the way, Russian direct military cooperation development with Iran, that these are filtering to the resistance, and that may well be directly intended. They're fully aware that that's happening, and they may be happy to see that. So that's important, that there's a technological element. And I think geopolitically, countries now have more choices in terms of how to manage their relations. And I think sort of the archetypal example of that is how Saudi Arabia recently reconciled with Iran. It's not a full reconciliation, but it's a major step and a major blow to the United States. And they did that with under Chinese auspices. That was brokered by China, and that was an extremely positive development in the region. So I think it's a mixed bag, and there may be arguments to be made for their more cautious approach. But I think when we're in the middle of a genocide, my instinct and my emotions tell me every country should be doing what it can to end the genocide first and foremost.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is surely there are just so many points to be made here, and I think that you went over just so many different sides of how to look at this, given that, and I find what is so compelling too is that there is this like urgent need for direct intervention in the realm of diplomacy, in the realm of international law, to stop this. That there countries that are growing leadership should feel that pressure. And then on the other side, as you mentioned, these kind of indirect, like what is happening geopolitically, what is happening with the multipolar world, does have this element of maybe lending toward a more advantageous position for
Yeah, I
the
mean,
Palestinian people in the long term.
to put it
Mm.
more bluntly, I'm sorry to interrupt. The weakening of the United States is good for world peace. The weaker the United States becomes as a global hegemon and imperial power, the less it's able to bully, threaten, stage coups, run proxy wars, and all the vile and violent and horrifying and criminal things the United States has been doing forever and continues to do. The more it's checked by other powers in a multipolar world, the better. And so maybe that's China and Russia's main role, is to check the United States, and that will trickle down to Palestine, because as we said, Israel without the United States is nothing. So a weaker United States that is pushed out of the region is good for the region. It's good for the people of the region. It's good for the people of the United States. I don't say that to show ill will towards the people of the United States, of which I'm one. I would rather see the United States as a peaceful country which is developing itself for its own people, that is cooperating with the world instead of fighting with the world and trying to dominate it. That would be a better, happier, more productive United States. I would rather the money was going to building housing and infrastructure and bridges and cleaning up the environment in the United States than on the horrors that the United States spends it on. I don't think that's a particularly crazy position, but that's far outside the mainstream in the United States.
And then lastly, I know I only have you for a few more minutes, but just maybe your quick thought on, I'm sure you've thought about it, but what would it mean for a liberated Palestine, in your estimation, what you've thought about in terms of its role in a multipolar world? Because I feel like what you have been outlining here is that the Palestine question, of course, is central to this emerging multipolar world. So, what would a liberated Palestine mean for a multipolar world, and of course, for Palestine within it?
Oh, that's such a good question. I wish we had another hour, but I'll say this. I mean, a question I got much earlier in this genocide more often is, was I surprised by what Israel is doing? And my answer was, and is, I'm not surprised, in the sense that Palestinians have always known Israel to be genocidal and capable of worse than what it's ever done. And it's doing that now. But where I was naive and wrong is, I thought, and I think many others were, and I've had lots of conversations with people, where I was naive and wrong was in thinking that the world will stop it. The world will restrain Israel. The world won't allow it. And now we know that's not true. And of course, when we say the world, there's two elements to that. There's, those who are standing aside or doing something, but perhaps not doing enough. And there are those who are actively assisting this genocide. And how this relates to your question is that you have to look at how tenaciously and how just there's no limits to the support that Israel is getting from the United States and from Western Europe. And this is an indication of how attached they are to this Zionist colonial project. It is their identity, it is their core, it is their avatar, it is the way they relive, and it is their values. When they talk about shared values, this genocide is their shared values. And that's to say, the defeat of Zionism, the defeat of this genocidal colonial regime, will be the defeat of that Western hegemonic genocidal ideology that has dominated the planet for the past 500 years. And we are seeing something emerging now that is different. We saw the first wave of decolonization, post World War II in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s, but it was quickly replaced by a kind of neo-colonialism and debt slavery, where the so-called third world or the developing world was quickly recolonized unofficially through the World Bank, the IMF. And what we're seeing now is the second wave of decolonization that is sweeping across Africa, where we've seen France kicked out of several of its former colonies, where it continued to basically run affairs. And we see the axis of resistance now expelling, I call it the slow motion expulsion of the United States from Southwest Asia. And we see in Latin America over the years, we've seen, countries, Colombia, which used to be called the Israel of Latin America, is one of the countries that has been most outspoken, most forthright in condemning the genocide in Palestine. The US will never give up trying to impose its will on Latin America, what it calls in racist terms its backyard. But of course, the US continued attempt to destroy Venezuela and turn it into an American colony. So I think that the struggle in Palestine is, in a sense, the linchpin, and the world has to move towards liberation from this American-led hegemony. It's a matter of life and death. It really is. Certainly, we see how it is for Palestinians. What does a liberated Palestine look like? I think it's been so hard to even imagine it as a possibility. I would say the main change that has happened in our mindsets, again, I can't speak for all Palestinians, but in terms of my own thinking and the conversations that I have, is that there was this sense that, yes, it's inevitable. We believe deeply, with great conviction, that Palestine will be liberated, but it was a sort of abstraction that existed in a far distant future. And the difference now is that it seems like a possibility, not just in our lifetimes, but within our grasp relatively soon. And I can't say if that's, I don't want to say, oh, it's 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, but it's now within our grasp in a way it never felt before. And what happens after that is hard to say, but I'll take that. Just that possibility is already provides an enormous amount of hope.
Well, Ali, I know I've kept you past the hour. I'm just going to put up a quick, very generous super chat here. Studio gave 2, but I'll just read 1 to you, Ali. They had a question for you. They said, given Biden's performance, do you think Democrats want Trump to win to blame the entire genocide on Palestine with him? CIA's main goal is identity politics, and that's how you get it. More important than money or war? Your take, Ali, quickly, and then I can definitely let you go, let you plug anything you want.
I don't, I mean, it's Tweedledum and Tweedledee. I mean, there would be no difference. I mean, it's just, I have to say, it's very disturbing and mentally exhausting to hear people telling me that, oh, no matter how bad you think Biden is, Trump will be worse. Well, the objective fact is that Biden has been worse than Trump. There is nothing that Donald Trump did as president, and he did terrible things, dreadful things, from his racist policies against immigrants, which Joe Biden has continued, and refugees and asylum seekers, his assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian general and mastermind of resistance. You can just list his anti-Palestinian policies. Donald Trump was awful, but Joe Biden has done a genocide that is on a scale that you have to go to the Holocaust to find apt comparisons in terms of just the sheer brutality, the cruelty, the determination to destroy a people out of sheer hatred. It's on a that's Joe Biden. Joe Biden did that. So I mean, you remember the meme back a few years ago of the Republicans of the B-52 dropping bombs, and the Democrats of the B-52 dropping bombs, but the B-52 has a
Yes.
rainbow
Right.
flag and
Yep.
I don't know what else, other symbols, woke symbols,
Black Lives Matter.
Black
you know,
Lives
like,
Matter,
yeah.
and that's it. That's the difference. There are people telling me that I have to put whatever they think is going to be their better well-being out of the Democrats winning above ending a Holocaust. Are you kidding me? I mean, if I had a genie that could come out of a bottle and say to me, "You could end this genocide, but you'll make all Americans worse off," would I? Of course I would. That would be the moral thing to do. It would be the correct thing to do, because this genocide is an American genocide. Israel couldn't do it without the United States. Americans are paying for it anyway. But, so there's the idea that we have to put the comfort and well-being of Americans and whatever they think is going to happen with the Supreme Court, as if the Democrats ever fought to keep the Supreme Court from becoming this extremist right-wing kangaroo court that it is. What did they do? When did they ever? The argument that keeps coming back is Roe versus Wade. Did they codify Roe versus Wade when they controlled both houses of Congress and the White House? Of course they didn't. They only come back and they promise these things at election time, like they're doing. Now Joe Biden came out. Bernie Sanders, the clown, the pro-genocide clown, who with the rest of the so-called squad is backing Joe Biden. You've got centrist and right-wing Democrats saying Joe Biden has to go, and you've got the squad and Bernie Sanders defending him. What? I mean, it's like we're going through a looking glass. And then Bernie Sanders said, we have this 100-day plan for Joe Biden for the next administration to, I can't remember what it was, like things they've been promising for years, cancel medical debt and student debt. I don't know what else it is. As if Joe Biden isn't president now, as if he hasn't been president for 4 years. Why didn't he do any of this when he had the ability, when he was president? Why didn't he fight for it? So it's just, I don't care. I'm not going to, I don't care. Don't try. Anyone who's going to come to me on Twitter and say, "Oh, but Donald Trump is the big orange Hitler." I mean, if you believe that, fine. But the bottom line for me is that if genocide isn't a red line for you, this lesser evil argument has reached the point of absurdity where people are saying, "Well, okay, okay, Joe Biden is bad, but." So now Joe Biden is literally Hitler. He's done what Hitler did. He's helped Israel do what Hitler did to the Jews, except to the Palestinians. You're telling me you still have to vote blue no matter who? No. At a certain point, you have to stop playing this game. You have to say, I cannot engage in this depravity any longer. And I'm sorry I'm ranting a bit, Danny, but this is the stuff that I get all the time on social media. And so I'm just saying no. Genocide. How is genocide? How is what people are seeing in Gaza? The stuff you see on your phone every day. The real beheaded babies, the Palestinian beheaded babies, done with the bombs that Antony Blinken, Joe Biden's Secretary of State, is skirting Congress and violating U.S. law to send to Israel without certification by Congress. How is that not a red line for you? How is there anything worse than that? How is there anything worse than that? And Trump didn't do worse than that when he was president. He didn't do worse than that. Joe Biden has been worse than Donald Trump. Will Donald Trump be worse than Joe Biden? I mean, I guess the United States is ingenious at inventing ways to be more cruel, to be more violent, to be more horrifying. But there is nothing worse than Joe Biden. Trump could equal Joe Biden, but he can't exceed the evil that he has done in Gaza. Joe, there's nothing that can concede that evil. This whole system is rotten. It's absolutely rotten. We are not in control of it, and simply telling us every 4 years go and vote for one of these genocidal monsters. I want nothing to do with that. And I think the least we can say, instead of telling people, go and vote for a man committing genocide because there's some benefit to that, scream outrage at that. That's the power we still have. They still haven't, not yet, they haven't taken away the First Amendment, but they've been working on it, and nobody has been working harder to do that than the Democrats with all their Russiagate bullshit and disinformation, misinformation that they're using as excuses to censor social media, which Danny, because we know how these Silicon Valley companies we're dependent on, we have no choice.
Yep.
When we do our live streams, the Electronic Intifada live streams, we have to take great attention to, curate the videos we show, to not trigger the YouTube censorship, and we still get age restricted. We've had so many videos taken down for no reason, no explanation, nothing that was in them other than speech that they don't like. And we're being told that this is to protect people from disinformation and misinformation. So I don't know what to tell you, Danny, but I'm sick of it.
Yeah. I remember a year ago, Ali, when you were on this show and we covered Al-Aqsa flood and we showed all of the images. And then I went on a trip to Vietnam, literally, I think the day or two afterward. And I check YouTube, and age restricted, demonetized. They immediately wanted to silence any legitimate coverage of Palestinian resistance at that time. And it's just getting worse. And then your point, lastly, I know you have to go, but your point about the Democrats is so on point. And I've been saying this for years. I know you have too. It's more insidious to align anything you consider to be about social justice with genocide, with war criminality, with imperial hegemony, than the opposite, in my opinion, because what happens is people truly then get bamboozled and duped, as you have experienced. I know I've experienced so many people in my life over the course of years. Just their knee-jerk reaction then is to say, well, Obama, well, Biden, they're the lesser of the two evils. But these are the people who are not only taking things to a higher level, they're more effective at the evil, but then they lay all of the groundwork for whoever comes next who may be less effective.
Look at the UK. Take, for example, the UK, who just had an election. And so the Labour Party, there was a real moment of hope in 2016, 17, when Jeremy Corbyn led this insurgent movement that took over the Labour Party from the left, offered a fairly moderate social democratic program, but something that was revolutionary in the context of decades of Thatcherism and neoliberalism. And he was fought tooth and nail and destroyed by the establishment, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, by the United States. Remember, we had Mike Pompeo, Trump's Secretary of State and the former head of the CIA, who said openly in public that the US would have acted to make sure that Jeremy Corbyn never became prime minister, that the US effectively would have staged a coup in the United Kingdom, one of America's largest military bases and vassal states, to prevent the British people from choosing who they wanted as prime minister. And so, of course, a major part of that, and my colleague Asa Winstanley has documented that for years, was this totally fake anti-Semitism crisis where Jeremy Corbyn, a lifelong anti-racist campaigner who is in solidarity with people all over the world, was turned into this anti-Semitic monster by the press, by the right wing in the Labour Party, by the intelligence services who are complicit in this. And then we get Keir Starmer, who is now the prime minister, who takes over the Labour Party with the full support of the establishment, the former chief prosecutor of the United Kingdom, worked for a law firm called Mishkon Dereya, which is informally known as Israel's law firm. This law firm has done a ton of work for the state of Israel and pursuing its interests in the UK. He's installed as prime minister, and in the first week, it's been like a week and a half that he's been prime minister. Now, let's go back for a second, Danny, to the International Criminal Court, which their prosecutor a few weeks ago announced that he was pursuing arrest warrants, international arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, the Israeli prime minister and defense minister. The normal procedure is that request goes to a panel of judges and they issue the arrest warrants. And I don't think there's ever been a case where the judges didn't issue the arrest warrants. It's sort of a formality. Well, it's been, I can't remember now, it's been more than a month, maybe 2 months. No arrest warrants have been issued because the British government, the former British government, the defeated Conservative government led by Rishi Sunak, lodged an objection with the International Criminal Court. And that stopped the court from issuing the arrest warrants. The Labour Party comes in, it says, we are going to remove the objections. And then, of course, and then the expectation would be the arrest warrants would be issued. It took a couple of phone calls from Washington. This is the reporting that the US mounted a campaign, and Israel, of course, and the new Labour British Foreign Secretary went to Israel and met with Netanyahu. And now the Labour government of Keir Starmer has reversed its position, and the UK is maintaining its block on those arrest warrants. So the point here is to say that these are all sham democracies. People in the UK are living in a sham democracy. They can vote for a different party, but they cannot control what their government does. And this is a crisis in the whole of the so-called West, and it's completely undermined belief in this democracy. And that's why you see the rise of so-called extremist parties, that they're trying to then exclude and outlaw. But they have, that's the system we live in. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't know that this is how we solve it. But I'm just saying that we at least have to be honest about diagnosing the problem. And that's where it is. But I don't know. I do have to go. I stayed longer than I said because I've been having a good time, and it's nice to talk about these things with you, Danny. It's you're doing such important work. But I just want to say that to end on a moment of hope amid so much horror and suffering. I had a message from one of my colleagues in Gaza today. And I won't give his name just because it was a private exchange. I didn't say I was going to reveal any of it. And he said the only thing that keeps us going is the world keeps talking about Gaza, that people keep going out and protesting, that people keep pressuring their governments. And he said, we see you, we hear you. And he said, that's the message I want you to convey to people. And it has been inspiring and heartening to see how much support there's been. But I just want to encourage people, don't get tired, don't flag, look after yourselves, but please come out. There are protests all over the United States. There's going to be big protests in Chicago with the DNC coming up. Right. Netanyahu is coming in July. There's people who tell me, that, and it touches my heart. There's people who tell me, because if people go to the Electronic Intifada net, we are publishing more writing from people in Gaza now than anyone else, more reportage, people telling what they're going through than anyone else is doing. I believe, I haven't seen any other publication doing it. People tell me that they're printing out the articles and they're just going to the street corner and handing them out to people, or outside the supermarket. Whatever you can do, please keep doing it. As long as people in Gaza are standing tall and they haven't given up, we mustn't. And there is great hope in what we are doing as people. And I'll say to your listeners, and viewers, Danny, that what you do is extremely important. I've been watching you for years. I learn a lot from what you do, and I know from the Electronic Intifada, we don't have big corporate support or anything like that. We do this because people believe in it and support it, and so I want to encourage them to continue to support you as they support us at the Electronic Intifada. And today's Tuesday. I know that there's people in other parts of the world where it's already Wednesday, but it's Tuesday for us. And tomorrow, Wednesday, we have our weekly Electronic Intifada live stream. So if you want more on what we've been talking about, particularly if you want to see unique analysis of the resistance, tune in tomorrow. It's at noon Eastern time live on the Electronic Intifada YouTube channel. We also stream it live on our Twitter account, which is at Intifada, INTIFADA. And of course, you can watch it all afterwards on our YouTube channel. We have tons of great stuff. And so I hope people will come and check it out.
Definitely. Well, I appreciate your kind words, Ali. I definitely want to bring everyone to the video description to make sure they are going to electronicintifada.net. You can also find, as Ali said, Electronic Intifada on YouTube. Subscribe to them, watch their live streams. They're doing, yeah, I mean, you all are doing such, just, I mean, it's if you don't understand, if you watch it, if you don't understand how much hard work goes into that, then I don't know what you're looking at. So definitely support. And Ali, I'm gonna let you go. Please definitely be in touch. I will be in touch. I would love to collaborate more with you, and then of course maybe get some other EI folks. You mentioned John. I know there are a few others. Asa, Nora. We can definitely do a bigger shows, maybe panels, things like that. So let's keep in touch very soon.
Absolutely, and keep up the great work. And thank you, Danny. You give us a lot of information, hope, inspiration, and we're a community and we're fighting for justice, and we just got to keep doing it and keep believing in it.
Definitely. All right, Ali, have a good evening. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye. All right, everyone. That was Ali Abunimah, Executive Director at the Electronic Intifada. We did go a little longer, so I don't think I will get into another story tonight. I'm actually a little relieved by that because I am not so excited by the electoral silly season that we are in right now in the United States. Maybe I'll give some comments on it before I leave here. But before I do that, I do want to give you an announcement. So tomorrow we have Pepe Escobar just before the Electronic Intifada goes live. Me and Pepe Escobar will be going live. I'm putting that link in the video description. I mean, in the video description, and I will put it in the chat so you can see it, but it's going in the video description right now. So July 17th, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Okay, I'm putting the link now. It is there in the video description. It is also in the chats, and I'll put it in the chat one more time. So I'm having Pepe Escobar on because he's been writing a lot about Yemen. He's been talking a lot about NATO and Russia and the multipolar world. That's where we're going to go to tomorrow because we have a lot to talk about, from Russia issuing a bounty on F-16s, Ukraine's deteriorating situation. We're also going to talk about the multipolar world as we lead up into the BRICS summit in October, because there have been more developments there. Talking about Yemen, he wrote a really great piece on Yemen we'll probably get into. So do come through. Definitely do come through tomorrow. We are going to have a great stream. Okay. And yeah, that's the big announcement for tomorrow. And then the following week, I'm working on some streams for Netanyahu's visit. Okay, I am hoping to have on more than a few guests. I think Scott Ritter will be returning a week from tomorrow, but I'm also hoping to have Ben Norton and maybe Eugene Perrier for the day afterward. Ben and Eugene have yet to confirm exactly 100%, so don't take me on that 100%. But that would be the plan next week as we go into August. Okay. And then we'll be probably close to August by that time. So that's the plan. I mean, next month I'm going to China at the end of the month, so I'll be making preparations for that. So it will be a bit of a shorter month, right? And then we'll enter September with fewer live streams. So I'm hoping to collaborate with more folks in at this level. YouTube doesn't like it. I know I've been focusing a lot on Ukraine, a lot on China at times. There hopefully will be more collaborations around China. I'm hoping to get some good interviews in China, but I'm hoping to also do some more programs on China as time and, of course, opportunities allow. So I am going to head out soon. I want to just give a shout out first to all the great moderators. Where are you? Let's see who's here today. We have Where Pilgrim Desert Mantis here today. I don't know if we had anyone else. We'll shout out the members in a second, but we have Where Pilgrim Desert Mantis. I see Ron Smith gifted a membership. I'm just going to pull that up here. Thank you so much for doing that. And I'm not sure if if who got that membership was named. Is it McDougal? I see Sherry here, Kai McDougal. I don't know if that was who received the membership, but if so, thank you for being a member now, and good to see you. I think it was Sherry here. Yes, Sherry was here. Thanks so much for being a member. I want to give a big shout out to all of the Patreon members who may be in the audience today. I want to give a plug to Patreon because, as Ali said, censorship comes hard, especially around these topics. Generally, these kind of videos on Israel, on Gaza, etc., do get demonetized. I don't generally announce it just because it is hard to keep track. Oftentimes, it is who knows kind of situation. Generally, it's triggered by certain imagery or keywords, hence why you might see my keywords look a certain way at times. My titles look a certain way. That's not because I don't like certain words. It's because if you get demonetized, if you get suppressed, then people don't see the work, and that is a problem. We are dependent on this, and so censorship does affect us. It affects behavior. So always remember that, and always remember that creators, journalists, independent analysts like myself do rely upon memberships. So if you do become a Patreon member, patreon.com/DannyHyPhong. That is the best place where you can become an annual member, and you do get some perks out of this. It's not just supporting my work, although that is really important, but you do get the ability to submit questions. You get priority with questions, priority with guest suggestions. Ali Abunimah has come up many times from Patreon subscribers. And of course, you get private digital message capabilities, which I do not answer generally in other venues. I mean, if there's an email that definitely piques my interest, of course, I will answer back. But if it's, an audience question, it's hard for me to keep track of all of them. So I tend to say, well, Patreon, YouTube, Substack. If you become a paid member, that's the best way to get that kind of access. And just know that these perks, they are the best that we can do. I am not a merch person. I don't think I'm going to be selling merch anytime soon. So do support this work just so it continues beyond censorship. That really will be the point of it all, I hope, for you. So with that said, everybody, I don't think I'm going to get into the story that Perhaps maybe I can tomorrow, if Pepe has a kind of a tight schedule. He will be joining me kind of late where he is in Asia. So there's a possibility that I just move this story. I was going to talk about JD Vance. I know that there's a lot of love for JD Vance coming through, especially my audience who follows geopolitics. And I just have to say, my assessment on U.S. electoral politics comes from many, many years of experiencing what it means for both Democratic and Republican Party candidates to say one thing and do another, or say one thing and actually do that thing. So there have been people talking to me about, well, JD Vance, he has this background. He is someone who is willing to kind of play the game in order to get what he wants, and what he wants is in our best interest. Well, maybe on a singular issue like Ukraine, and I feel like that's a very important issue. And so I will never badmouth anybody who wants to place pressure on politicians around that singular issue. However, my approach has never been about a singular issue as much as I focus on particular issues like Ukraine, like the threat of nuclear war. I do find that to be principal and primary in many respects. But if you are going to verbalize that you want to escalate war with Iran, if you are going to say that China is the biggest threat and it's time to militarily, economically, and politically ratchet up tensions toward what would be an equally, if not more, disastrous war with China, then you will not have my support. Actually, you will have my condemnation. And I will focus on this, not because there is anything wrong with anti-interventionism around Ukraine and NATO, but because if you are not consistent on all of these issues of peace, then it does pose a problem. We end up choosing between issues that have no hierarchy of importance. It's interesting that a lot of times liberals will say there's no hierarchy of oppression. Well, when it comes to issues like geopolitics, there truly is no supposedly hierarchy of geopolitical questions. It really is a matter of what you are willing to tolerate. And so for some, they can tolerate perhaps hawkish politics, hawkish policies on Iran, on China, etc. But that's something I can't. And so it's important for us, I believe, if we are going to forge true peace in our time, that we just really do consider that there is no disconnection between Ukraine, NATO's Ukraine project, and Iran and China. That while there may be some disagreements within the elite, there may be some discussions that happen between, amongst, and around them that feel like disagreements. Just know that when Donald Trump was president in 2016 to 2020, that while many say he didn't start any so-called new wars, he escalated many, many of the wars that he inherited from the Obama administration. You could say that when it comes to this idea of no new wars, that it was very difficult. We couldn't have predicted Ukraine 2022, the special military operation during the Trump period. But it is to say that if you don't understand that Trump's policies toward Russia actually helped lead us to this moment of the special military operation, then uh, I don't think you're looking close enough at this. So I just wanted to say that to underscore that here on this channel, there will not be berating of others. I'm not going to condemn, especially friends that are on the same side. That's not what we do, right? We don't do that publicly. We don't try to shame. We don't try to expose people who are truly trying to forge peace in our time, even if we disagree on certain issues. That's why you don't see me do that on this channel. I don't agree with everyone on everything on this channel when it comes to geopolitics or just politics in general. However, me, myself, and my opinion, I will always put out there to persuade others to come to that position. And so especially the audience. That's the most important thing for me, because while I bring people on to talk about Ukraine, to talk about multipolarity, to talk about China, to talk about et cetera, Gaza, the big point here is not so much, am I going to convince this particular person I'm bringing on for this purpose to come to my viewpoint? No, I'm not centering me there. What I want to do, though, is that for those who are drawn to certain members and participants and guests of this show, to then hear what I have to say about things and then to weigh it all, right? Because I think that's, especially when we're all under the umbrella of a peace movement, that's how we get to a higher level, not just of understanding, but of concerted political action. And that's where we are going to go here with this channel from here on forward. So, with that said, I believe that it is time to head out of here. Before I go, though, I'm going to say thank you to Studio, because you gave so many generous super chats today, too, that amounted to a whopping 150 US dollars. That is a very generous super chat donation tonight. So thank you so much for your support. Your question was, do you think Israel's support truly is unipolar? Trump is elected, then charged with genocide. The CIA domestic roles to divide Americans. And by the way, I really appreciate you spelling that out in the way you did, because that can get flagged as text. I'm sure that's why you did it. Politically and religiously, Biden put up on purpose as a scapegoat in the view of the kind president is gone. So, Studio, your question, I'm going to try to understand as best I can. I think you're saying, do I think, and I know you wanted probably Ali to answer this, but I'm sorry, I can only give him one because he was truly in a rush. Do you think Israel's support truly is unipolar? Trump is elected, then charged with genocide. Okay, I see what you're saying. So to divide us all, so I'm having a hard time with the second part, but do I think support for Israel is truly unipolar? I think that's a very good question. If you're still here, of course, you can perhaps clarify, but I will just say, yes, I do believe support for Israel is unipolar, in the sense that support for Israel coming from the bipartisan political establishment, the neocons, the hawks in Washington, is very much about maintaining a unipolar order, and doing so in one of the most important strategic regions. Because when we're talking about now natural resources and economics, the United States has long become its own energy producer. It has long done enough to manipulate the oil markets as best as it can to try to assert dominance over them. Now, of course, we're seeing with Russia, with Venezuela, and other countries that refuse to bow down to the diktats of U.S. empire. We see that so-called energy, quote-unquote, independence is not as lucrative as I think the United States empire thought it would be. But nonetheless, Israel still remains an important strategic partner, so to speak. You can't really call it a vassal, because Israel's role has been so critical to the maintenance of U.S. hegemony in this key strategic region that it has been able to assert far more effectively than, let's say, a Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine, assert its own strategic interests in this region and drag the United States along with it. That's why some people believe Israel may be in control, but I think that's an inaccurate assessment. What we are seeing is what's supposed to be a vassal, or at least what's supposed to be a weaker partner, a more subservient partner, have so much leverage in this region because it is the entity that occupies it. And because the United States has become weaker, has become less under control of its own empire, and because it doesn't have the ability to militarily or economically offer anything in this region that is desirable, we have seen what U.S. empire has done to replace the former colonial powers, the UK, France. We've seen how the U.S. replacing them as the number one foreign interferer, the number one interventionist power in the region. We've seen how that's gone very, very badly. We've seen the massive numbers of casualties, the massive numbers of destabilized countries, the attempt to eradicate all hope for sovereignty and independence, for a true and just end to the colonial era for West Asia. We've seen it from the genocide in Yemen to the genocide in Gaza to the Iraq War to Afghanistan. I mean, we go on and on and on, right? The destruction of Libya, the constant meddling in Egypt's politics. I could continue because the United States has really left no uh, land untouched when it comes to West Asia. So Israel is very important because with Israel, the United States can find alignments in many areas. Israel feels like it's under siege from the axis of resistance. The United States just so happens to want to get rid of the axis of resistance. Israel wants to go to war with Hezbollah. The United States just so happens that to want Hezbollah in Lebanon to be destroyed. Israel wants war with Iran. The United States just so happens to want Iran to eventually undergo regime change. Israel continuously bombs Syria. The United States has waged an over decade-long war in Syria, a dirty war of sanctions, a war of foreign-sponsored terrorism, a war of plunder, occupying a third of the country. Do I need to go on? I mean, this is an alignment that is often not highlighted by those who want to say that Israel is in control of the United States' political structure, etc. It's important to look at it more as alignment, even if there are maybe tactical or even just public relations differences. For example, I'm sure the Biden administration, Blinken, and these kind of impudent, and impotent leaders of the U.S. empire now, I'm sure they would want Netanyahu and Israel to take a more measured approach in its genocide, one that is more acceptable, one that lends itself to a better world public opinion, and one that doesn't put the United States in the situation where it needs to contend with its own population's discontent toward this genocide. But on the other hand, the United States continues to fund armed aid and even participate in it. Why? Because of alignment, because the destruction of Palestinian resistance is completely aligned with U.S. interests. Why? What will a Palestinian state, with the U.S. having nothing economically to offer, nothing politically, diplomatically, or militarily to offer a new Palestinian state? What does the existence of the Palestinian people do for the United States' empire? Nothing. See, this is the point here. It does nothing. And that's where we see the selfishness. That's where we see the pariahic, the absolutely crass and unhinged character of U.S. empire at this stage of its development. That's where we see it completely exposed. And so the alignment, if you think that Netanyahu is barbaric, if you think that the genocide is barbaric in Gaza, well, the United States is not only endorsing that barbarity, it is that barbarity. That is, and I'm talking about the empire here because some will quibble, well, the United States is not the government. Yes, very true. Unfortunately, when we talk about the United States, when I talk about the United States, I am talking about the political elites. I'm talking about the real ruling elites, those who control the political elites to engender policies that benefit them. So this is surely not about demonizing American people, because in the electoral silly season now that we're in, now that we are presented with choices, right? The heroic Donald Trump, who survived a political assassination and is now moving forward with J.D. Vance, the once anti-Trump, now pro-Trump, so-called former working class stalwart who supposedly has all these very desirable qualities, unpredictable. He does what he wants, what will benefit him. It's important for me to just say outward to all of you, I will never put any trust in any section, any side, any politician. I didn't put it in Bernie Sanders. I didn't condemn Bernie Sanders for good things, just like I won't condemn J.D. Vance for being pro getting out of Ukraine. I didn't condemn Donald Trump in 2016 or 2020. Get out of NATO. right? Better relations with Russia. Never condemned that a single time. But I questioned, as I will continue to question, people like J.D. Vance when they start talking about escalating war with Russia, China, escalating war with Iran, when they talk ill about Hamas, when they talk about war on terror, when they outline and roll out a domestic policy which is literally just corporate theft, when they don't offer anything really better than Democrats, right? I mean, this is what we're talking about. Some people may disagree with my economic policy, but I just am not a Republican or a Libertarian or anything on economic policy until things get better. I don't care how you get there. Test out your theories. Go ahead, right? People always lambast me for being a socialist, a communist. Go ahead, test out your political theories, please. A lot of people think they know better, but I just look at history. Communism doesn't really, it's not giving me historical amnesia, right? I think about, when did things ever get better in the United States? How did slavery end in the United States? How did workers' rights of any kind get instituted in the United States? People fought back. People organized. It was people, whether it's Africans who freed themselves, right? Pressured, became a focal point in that period that led to a civil war. Their resistance was a big part of why slavery ended. If we look at any kind of political rights in the United States, politicians just didn't give that to anyone. It was people who fought for it. The Vietnam War ending, the Vietnamese people were the number one reason why that ended, but it was resistance among people in the United States against that war. Draft resistors, protesters who said, no, we're not going to do this. Not only we're not going to do this, we're going to make it really hard for you to govern until you stop doing this. And so that, along with, of course, the focal point, the Vietnamese people's heroic resistance, is the reason why the Vietnam War came to a close. It's why the U.S. lost. And so my message to all of you who may want to support someone like J.D. Vance or Donald Trump, or perhaps any politician that maybe looks at all attractive as an alternative to Joe Biden's across the board warmongering, right? Because this ain't no endorsement of Joe Biden. Pressure them. Make them do what you say they're going to do, or what they say they're going to do. Not only that, though, in those other areas, right? We can't be silent. We have to cover it. We have to talk about it. We have to also fight it if it is going to come to the point, right? Because I came into geopolitics. I had always been following war. Look at any of my writings from 2013 onward. I'd always been covering war. I covered Syria. I analyzed Libya. I did all of that. But I came into a geopolitical focus out of the multipolar world emerging, Russia and China. And I really became very involved in making this my focal point, making this my real intense focus, when Donald Trump began escalating with China. And it was because the threat of a bigger war was just, it felt very real. It felt like something that could happen. Maybe I was naive at that time. But what wasn't naive was the fact that relations between the United States and China became the worst they had been since before normalization. And that meant that war was very close, that we were possibly at the precipice. So, again, I say all of this to say, I think that's how we should be approaching the electoral silly season in the United States. The duopoly reigns. There's no room in it for us. Just remember that. If we're ever talking about people like Vance or Trump or Biden, we are talking about people who do not have any accountability to us, especially after the election. Maybe during the election, they'll say things, they'll attract people to their votes. But remember, after the election, there is no accountability. There's none. Not unless we make that happen. So there you go. That's my take. With that said, everybody, I stayed on longer than I thought I was going to. I see a few other super chats. We have Simone Sterling called the popo on me today for writing. So I'm not for writing on the sidewalk with chalk. This is 2024. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, no, there's a lot of fear. I live in a city. That doesn't make it better because the police are very brutal in the city. But I know there are certain areas of the United States. My wife was just telling me in certain parts of New York outside of the city, certain parts of Westchester, things like that. They, one of her nursing friends is Chinese. She went to a neighborhood for a wedding that was very wealthy. And when her boyfriend, who wasn't invited to the wedding, came to pick her up and got out of the car, he was approached by neighborhood watch people, and they were questioning him. And then they got the cops to question him. That's the kind of fear that especially the wealthy live in, to be quite frank, right? I would never worry about that in my neighborhood. I would never worry about that back where I grew up. But there are certain places in the United States I would never want to go to, but I would very much worry about that. And it's not just wealthy neighborhoods, of course, it's just segregated neighborhoods, those kind of things. I would very much worry about that. Marvin Vargas said, great stream. Thank you for having Ali. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you. All right, everybody, I'm out of here. Remember, do like the stream as you go. Do subscribe on Patreon if you can. As I leave, here is the link in the chat again for tomorrow's stream. I will be on with Pepe Escobar, 11 a.m. Eastern time. And all right, everybody, take care. Goodbye.